Hi folks, welcome to this mini lecture on false memory findings of the last couple of years. So what I've done here is just try to bring you up to date with 2020 papers in false memory, just to show you the kind of things that are going on right now, and 2021 papers as well. So I hope that gives you an idea of how large the field is, how much data there is, and how much replication is going on of findings that I find familiar here. If we go through some of these findings, they are very familiar to articles I've seen in the 2010s, 2000s, and so on. So there's quite a lot of replication. So let's just take this article and look at it just because it's recent and it's about false memories, just to give you an idea of what's going on in the literature. So Wing et al. 2020 did a false memory and true memory study using stimuli such as apples and pictures, things like that. And they found that false memories for the lures, or the kind of suggestive associations, the false memories were lessened when the high concept specific similarity in cortical areas was accompanied by differential hippocampal representations in the corresponding exemplars, right? So that's really complicated. I'm just reading from the abstract here. But what they're saying is when there was a coordination between the cortex and the hippocampus, right? So the upper brain and the lower brain, there was less false memories, right? So that's what it's saying here. And it concludes by saying that the hippocampus serves to separate concurrent cortical overlap in the service of detailed memory, right? So it's kind of saying that the hippocampus helps determine between overlapping cortical areas when recalling memory. It helps specifically identify detailed memory. And it repeats that in the significance statement here at the bottom, where it says that fine-grained discrimination, so they mean discrimination between true and false memories, depends on the interaction between the cortex and the hippocampus, right? So when both are coordinating well, the hippocampus helps discriminate using information that it's pulling from the cortex. All right, so this is just an example of one study, which is an fMRI study, so they know which areas of the brain are active during the tasks. Now here is another study to demonstrate the diversity of current research on false memories. So in this research, they use the false memory word list, the DRM word list that you're familiar with, where all the words are related and then there's one word that is not actually presented, but then it's recalled falsely later. So what they did here is compare people with schizophrenic diagnosis with normal healthy controls, and they actually used measures of false memory such as the DRM, but they did not do brain scans this time. They did ECG scans, which is not fMRI. This is a kind of scan that measures in milliseconds how quick a recognition brainwave is to arrive at the scalp, ECG. So what they found is differences between schizophrenics and healthy controls in their brainwaves at the time of recognition of a correct word that was presented or an incorrect word that was not presented, such as a false memory. And let's go on to the graph that they show. In the same paper, Favre et al. 2020, they show here the difference in the brainwaves between schizophrenics and healthy controls. You see in the dark lines are the healthy controls, and you can see at around 200 milliseconds here that they have a higher peak here. I think this is called the P2 peak here. And you can see the healthy controls are not really having that kind of recognition peak in the brainwave quite as high as the healthy controls. And then similarly, later on in the graph, you see that the healthy controls, as is usual, their brainwaves reduce during the P400 stage here, and they're significantly lower than the schizophrenics, which have not adapted. So you see more signs of recognition of the word in healthy controls than you do in individuals with schizophrenia. So that's just another interesting result to show you what's going on currently. Now here is an interesting study that involved one of our Portsmouth University lecturers, Harmut Blank, who you may have had for a course, I'm not sure. But anyway, Harmut was involved in this, and this is a study that was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It's a really top journal, one of the top 3 science journals in the world. And it is a great study because what they did is they implanted false memories using the family familiarity paradigm. In other words, they had suggestions from the students' parents of what did and didn't happen, and they implanted during a series of 3 interviews something that didn't happen in the students, and the parents reinforced that by saying that that didn't happen, a little bit like the Lost in the Mall study. So this is like a replication of that rich false memory line of research that started with Lost in the Mall. It's been replicated many times, and one of the great things about this study is it was replicated again. They did indeed implant memories in 20% of individuals who were in the suggestive condition, but in 56% of individuals who had massive suggestion. So, a lot, the group that had more suggestion. But what's interesting about this is it went one step further. It's important to replicate this, of course, because you know that in court, people try and debunk the Lost in the Mall study, so it's an important study. But what they did is they tried to see if they could reverse it in the last interview, right? So in the last debriefing, they told the participants that actually it's possible that external sources could affect your memory, they were told. For example, family narratives could affect your memory in an incorrect way. And they also raised the possibility in the debriefing of false memories being inadvertently created in the memory interviews, right? So after people were told that, this tended to reverse the false memory buildup over the first 3 interviews and return the false memory rates down to the baseline. So there was still some false memories, but it was down to the baseline without suggestion. So they say this is evidence that false memories can be substantially reduced by easy to implement techniques without causing collateral damage to true memories. Now they say that because the true memories were not damaged by this debriefing, right? So this happened quite shortly after the memory was implanted. I would wonder if the memory was implanted and then it was allowed to stay implanted for many years, and people, made a public statement that they believed it, then I would wonder whether it would be so easy to reverse a false memory. But very soon after the false memory has been implanted, if you tell them that, hey, this might have been, that might have been a false memory, or your memory might have been affected by the interviews, you can reverse it at least immediately after, soon after the memories were implanted. So that's good news. And this is something what you find in retractors, so retractors of false memories are those people who've developed false memories, but once they get away from it and they hear about the possibility of memory distortions, then they retract. So there is hope for people who have developed false memories. So this is just an example of some of the research going on today. So this is a nice review paper by Lillian Kloft in the Netherlands and her advisor Henry Otgaar. I know both of these people, I've met these guys. Into answering the question of, is it true that alcohol and drugs may lead to being more suggestible to false memories? And of course, this comes up in legal cases where people were drunk and then there's a disagreement about what happened when they were drunk and so on. I think Elizabeth Loftus and Davis wrote about this in 2016, where they hypothesized that alcohol could be a problem in remembered sexual encounters and things like that, which is very controversial. And then some people have come out and spoken out against what Loftus and Davis wrote about. And it's been a little bit of a Twitter thing going on as well. But anyway, before that happened, before the Twitter argument happened, I think it was Henry Otgaar was replying to another false memory researcher who was criticizing the idea of alcohol and false memories. But anyway, before that, they put this article out. I mean, they did the research on this first, where they did a big review on all the past research on alcohol and cannabis and its effect on susceptibility to false memories. And what they concluded from the review of past data is that when intoxicated during an event, alcohol is most likely to increase this susceptibility to false memories at high intoxication levels or after a delay, whereas cannabis exerts detrimental effects during acute intoxication but not necessarily once sober. So it's a complicated interaction there, but both of them can increase susceptibility to false memories. So they say in the sentence before, alcohol and cannabis under certain conditions increases susceptibility to false memories. So that is not boundless. There's boundaries to that relationship, but it can happen. And then they go on to say, for other substances, ecologically valid research separating different memory phases is needed. So it sounds like they're talking about other substances. We need more data. And they say overall differences between substances regarding false memories effects exist, suggesting that a nuanced approach is needed when dealing with intoxicated individuals in a legal context. So I think what they're saying is if you're dealing with a legal case that involves cannabis, then only look at the cannabis literature on false memories, because there's a different relationship there. If the false memory case involves alcohol, then look at the alcohol and false memory research, because there's a very specific relationship that is quite nuanced. So I think that's a useful paper. Now let's see what else is in the literature in the last year. So in this paper, they found that negative emotion increases false memory for person-action conjunctions, right? So what they did here, they had two experiments that demonstrated that eyewitnesses often falsely recognize an actor performing an action that had actually been performed by someone else, even if the action involved negative emotions and the actor in question had only appeared in emotionally neutral concepts. So what they did is participants viewed videos, each involving an actor performing a neutral, for example, making oatmeal, or a negatively valenced action, such as killing a roach, and were asked to remember the events or to rate them for valence and arousal in experiment 2. So in both experiments, participants remembered negative actions better than neutral actions. Participants were also especially likely, however, to falsely recognize a different person performing a negative action. All right, so experiment 2 revealed that this effect was modulated by the prior emotional context in which an actor had appeared. Participants were still just as likely, however, to falsely recognize an actor who had only appeared in neutral contexts, now performing a negative action, as they were to falsely recognize this actor performing a different neutral action. These results suggest that even individuals seen only in benign contexts can be falsely remembered as having participated in emotionally charged events. So this is an interesting set of results, and what I tend to find in these research articles that measure emotion and false memories, that it's very context specific. So what I would say is, in this context of remembering a negative action such as killing a roach, they tended to be remembered better than neutral actions, which makes kind of sense, doesn't it, that anything a bit more emotional might be remembered, but also that participants were also especially likely, however, to falsely recognize a different person performing a negative action. So the idea that negative emotion can sometimes lead to more false memories here. So that's another interesting, fairly complicated set of results actually. But that's what you usually find in experiments. You find complicated results. But in this case, negative emotion increased false memories. So in this study, also from the Netherlands, with collaboration with British researchers such as Mark Howe, so it's Henry Otgaar again working on this one, and it's Schopen et al. 2021. In this, they used the DRM word lists that you may be familiar with if you listen to my lecture in previous weeks, where they present lots of words that are all related, and then there's one word that is not actually presented, which is like a trick word that people have false memories for. And what they were doing here is comparing children at age 11 and 12 to adults on their false memory creation of those words that are lures. So what they found was children had lower false memory levels than adults. That's something that's been found before. In this particular paradigm, it's been found that because children don't have strong semantic networks between the associations between words. Like we as adults have strong associations between networks of words. Children don't have that, so they're not as susceptible to the DRM word list paradigm. By the way, children are very susceptible to the misinformation effect, but we're not talking about that here. We're talking about the word list paradigm. Now, what they were interested in is if you would forewarn individuals that there may be false memories coming up in the test, then how much can you reduce false memory propensity? So they say that forewarning, which is warning that false memories might be in the test, reduced but did not eliminate false memory propensity in both children and adults. So in other words, if you warn people that there may be the tendency for false memories that are associated here in these word lists, it reduced their false memory. And they also go on to say, our findings further indicated that forewarning was more effective in reducing false memory levels in children than it was in adults. So warning children about false memories coming up seemed to help more than adults. But this is only specific to the word list association. So we're only talking about false memories that are to do with associations of concepts. It may not apply to the misinformation effect or to rich false memories. So that's just another example of something interesting going on in the literature this year, actually. So in summary, I just wanted to show you quickly some recent research on false memories. We've already looked at some recent research before, but I just want to add to it to fill it out a little bit. So we talked about the Wing et al. Study that found that fine-grained discrimination of true versus false memories involved an interaction between hippocampus and cortex, right? So if you did not have enough hippocampus involvement, you did not distinguish very well between true and false memories. But when you had both working together in an fMRI study, that was indicative of more accuracy and less false memories. Now, in the Favre et al. 2020 study, they compared schizophrenics to healthy controls. And they found that schizophrenics had different ECG waveforms when trying to recognize in the DRM false memory word task. So when they're trying to make the decision of whether a word is new or old in the test, they don't have the same recognition peak that healthy controls do, and they don't have the similar dip at N 400 milliseconds after in brain waves. So that was one of those caps where you do ECG studies, you measure brain waves, and the recognition peak that you get in those recognition in those brainwave studies. That methodology is good for measuring temporal time of recognition. You don't know where in the brain it's coming from, but it's very good at measuring the milliseconds for the recognition of a word or not. Now, the Oeberst et al. 2021 study found that false memories implanted and then reversed by telling participants at the end that errors can be inadvertently created in memory interviews. So this was an important study done with Harmut Blank, of course, of Portsmouth, in that they implanted these full rich false memories, a little bit like the Lost in the Mall study, and then they reverse them again by telling them that there may be errors inadvertently created in these memory interviews right in the last meeting that they had, and then they reversed the false memory rates down to baseline. They didn't go down to 0, but they went down to a level that you would expect without suggestion. And then Kloft et al. 2021 reviewed past research and concluded that alcohol and marijuana can increase susceptibility to false memories, but only in certain circumstances. It's different for alcohol and marijuana. Now, Kersten et al. 2021 found that negative emotion increases memory distortions. It's very specific to a part of their findings. It's quite complicated findings that they had, but that's one part of it. The Schopen et al. 2021 study found that forewarning people about a word list can reduce false memories, and that those forewarnings were more effective in 11 and 12-year-olds than they were in adults. That's very specific to those DRM word lists, that finding. But it's interesting because sometimes I think false memories are associative in nature. In other words, you have a false memory because there was some association that made you believe that it was true. A false memory is caused by association more than from suggestion, which is a different kind of mechanism. So that is just a sample of what is happening right now in the literature. I think when I did this search, I think there was hundreds of papers, no, I think dozens of papers, I should say, from 2020 and 2021, and I picked some of them out here. And my impression, for somebody who's been reading literature for a long time, is that this is very reinforcing of what we know already. Some of these results are like, I'm kind of thinking, yeah, I kind of know that already from previous research, but it's still valuable because it reinforces that belief. For example, I already knew that false memory discrimination needed a combination of and a coordination between the hippocampus and the upper cortex. And then when I read about this new study that shows that in fMRI studies, a new fMRI study, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm a little bit more certain than I was before that the hippocampus and cortex coordinate to recognize true memories and not have false memories. And then if you don't have enough engagement of the hippocampus, then you might not distinguish between two pieces of information in the cortex. So anyway, that's what I felt about doing this review of recent research, is that I kind of knew some of this already, and I'm happy to see it replicate. Even in the study that involved Harmut Blank, that showed that you can reverse false memories. That is not something new to me, actually. It may be new to you, but I've seen previous research that shows when you do, in the debriefing, say, we try to implant a memory, can you now tell me which memory was true and which one was false, you find massive reductions in false memory rates after that suggestion, if it comes just at the right time and not too long after the experiment. So that's why I'm kind of confident when I read a paper like that I think it was probably well done, So anyway, hope you enjoyed this little tour of 2020 and 2021 research, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye.